Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get started, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for our first session of the Knowledge Bites webinar series. We have Kevin Stapelton from the Vermont Department of Labor here. If you were at the Southern Vermont Economic Development Summit at the end of May, Kevin presented that morning. It was quite an entertaining presentation. So the goal of these webinars are to provide high-level introduction to economic and workforce development programs, resources, and tools. And so at the end of this, information will be provided, at the end of each session, information will be provided where you guys can get more in-depth assistance if you want to continue using whatever resource or tool is being presented. So the structure of the webinars, Kevin's going to present for 20 minutes. There will be about 10 minutes of question and answer. If you have a question, there is the chat function. So just go ahead and, as you think of them, go ahead and type those questions into the chat function. And these are all being recorded, and they'll be archived on the website, which is what you can see at the bottom of this screen. And so I'm going to go ahead and pass it along to Kevin. Kevin, I'm going to switch presenter mode.
Okay.
We should be able to see Kevin's screen in a moment.
Do you have it?
Yep, perfect. So hopefully everyone can see Kevin's screen. And Kevin, take it away. Good.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Hi, everybody. As some of you know, I think I've met a few of you. My name is Kevin Stapleton. I am an economist for the Department of Labor. Technically, I am the Assistant Chief of Economic and Labor Market Information for the LMI Division of the Vermont Department of Labor. The presentation today is, most of you, if you've seen me talk before, know that I usually talk about the economy in general. Today, we're going to focus on the actual data products that our office generates and how you can use those tools. So there are basically 4 programs within our office that are part of the, funded through and part of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And then there are a couple other products that we frequently use that we think you might find helpful. And today I'm just going to briefly introduce those 4 programs, the ancillary programs, and then answer any questions you might have. If you have a question as we're going through and you want to put it in the chat box, please do. I may address it during the presentation. It might be something that we save till the end just to keep us moving in a timely fashion. But so to start, the Labor Market Information Division, as I said, is funded by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, but is housed within the Vermont Department of Labor, and our job is to collect, analyze, and disseminate data about the economy in Vermont, and specifically about the labor market. We produce data to help policymakers, to help individuals who are entering the job market, to help firms. Wide variety of people use our data, and we will take a look at what that data is now. The first data product that we will discuss is called the Quarterly Census of Employment and Wages, short QCW is what we refer to it as. And this is really the core product upon which all of our other data gets benchmarked and based. It is a measure of the total employment and wages of all Vermont firms that are part of the unemployment insurance program. It allows you, QCW allows you to look at data by town, by county, by LMA, by Workforce Investment Board, which we don't use much anymore, statewide, and you can look at total employment in an industry per quarter, and you can look at the wages, the average wages of that industry as well. It's collected through the unemployment insurance program. To participate in the UI program, you have to provide this information every quarter. So we take that and produce out of the unemployment insurance reports the quarterly census of employment and wages. It is the anchor, as I said, for all of our other data products because it's a census. Unlike the other programs we're going to discuss, which are all sample-based, QCW is a complete census of every unemployment insurance paying firm in the state. It consists of about 21,000 firms in the state, and it leaves out maybe, as best as we can tell, maybe 15 or 20% of all employment because of employment that is not involved in the statewide unemployment insurance program. The real strength of QCW is that it's very accurate because it's a census, very detailed geographies, and very detailed industry analysis. The biggest limitation to QCW is because it's a census and because it is so detailed and accurate, it takes a long time to produce. So it takes about 6 months for us to produce a quarter's worth of QCW data. So if you go on our website right now, the most recent data is the fourth quarter of 2016. It's a limited universe in that the universe of the program is just UI firms or firms that participate in the unemployment insurance program. The other thing to keep in mind is people use QCW as time series, but it's not built to be time series data, and it actually doesn't work very well as time series data. We could talk all day about why that is, but if you want to know, we can follow up on it later. So that's QCW, and this is what it looks like when we produce data with QCW. This is the state of Vermont, and you can see from this that QCW tells us that construction is 5% of employment in Vermont, 13,202 people over the year starting Q4 2016 through Q3 2017. Those dates are wrong. That should be Q4 2015 through Q3 2016. At any rate, this is the type of data you can get from QCW, although albeit 6 months delayed. The next program we'll discuss very briefly is current employment statistics. If you think about QCW as sort of the benchmark data that everything else is founded upon, CES is an attempt to produce a more timely snapshot of employment by industry across the state. As a policymaker in DC or in Montpelier, if we tell you that, hey, 6 months ago we lost 500 jobs, it doesn't allow a very quick policy response. CES was created as a sort of as a response to that problem, and what it does is measure employment hours and earnings of all workers on non-farm payrolls. So it's a broader scope than QCW, and it's published in a much more timely fashion. Next week we will publish the June data. So instead of being 6 months delayed, it's 2 or 3 weeks delayed. It gives policymakers a sort of as close as we can get to an up-to-date snapshot of the economy in Vermont. The downside of that is that it's a modeled survey. We can't survey 21,000 firms each month. So instead, they create a statistical model that uses data from about 2,000 firms each month in Vermont. Nationwide, it's 160,000 firms. And the idea here is to estimate job growth and wage changes over time, in a more timely fashion than QCW, and also in a fashion that allows you to use it as time series. And again, we won't get into the details now, but whereas QCW should not be, it sometimes is, but should not be used as time series, CES is meant to be used as time series. So the real strengths are the timeliness, the fact that you're going to get it within 3 weeks of the end of the month. Much broader universe because it pulls in not just UI covered employment, but a broader definition of employment, so firms outside of UI, and that it can be used as time series. The most significant limitation to CES data is that the geographies, you can't get down to town and county level. The best you can do is the Burlington NECTA, which is basically Chittenden, Franklin, and parts of Grand Isle, you can get that geography, or you can get statewide geographies. You can't get town-level data or county-level data. The other limitation of CES is that it is a modeled sample, 2,000 firms. At the state level, it gets revised both in the following month and then in the following year. And occasionally those revisions can be pretty dramatic. The 2016 revisions cost the state about 2,000 jobs. Obviously not in reality, but when we benchmarked the data to QCW, we found that CES over the course of a year had overestimated employment by about 2,000, out of whatever 350,000 jobs. So small amount percentage-wise, but pretty significant in terms of total change in employment. So that's CES, and a quick little look at how we use CES. One thing we do with CES, some of you have seen this chart before, is put it in time series and look at what has happened in the state of Vermont, what has happened in Burlington, what has happened in the state minus Burlington. This is just change in employment month to month since the recession started. So that's one thing we do with the data. You can also look at CES data just by industry and say that how much has manufacturing changed, how much has construction changed over the month. And it is at the statewide level seasonally adjusted. Take a deep breath. The next program we'll talk about is Local Area Unemployment Statistics, known as LAUS, probably the worst acronym ever. But what it measures, instead of measuring what firms report or businesses and establishments report, this is a measurement of what households report. And it is a survey trying to figure out what the labor market situation is for individual towns, for counties, statewide. It is a sample of about 1,200 households in the state, which constitutes about 3,000 people because your average household has 2.5 people in it. And it's looking at what is the labor market situation or labor force situation for all 3,000 people in this survey, because that is how we generate things like the number of unemployed persons and the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate is probably the most well-known statistic that comes out of Laos. But Laos tells us, for instance, that right now the unemployment rate in Vermont is 3.1%. That tells us that of all the people who responded, all the households that responded to this survey, of all the people who were looking for work or working, 3.1% of them can't find a job in the past month. That is the type of data that LAUS or Laos produces. It is, as I said, a modeled survey of approximately 1,200 households. It's based primarily on the current population survey, and then some other inputs go into the data. But the great part about LAUS, about the current population survey, is that you get really detailed household data. And if you ever want to dig into it, the current population survey asks questions well beyond just typical labor force data. You can find out what percentage of the population is working part-time because they can't find full-time work. What percentage of the population is working part-time because they need to be home with their children. There's a real depth of information in LAUS in terms of households. There's also a lot of geographical precision, and it can be used in time series. So that's the real strength of this data set. The biggest limitations, especially in a small state like Vermont, is that the monthly revisions can be pretty significant. At the state level, the monthly revisions can move the unemployment rate by 0.1%, sometimes 0.2%. But at the smaller geographies, the error ranges are very high. When you get down to town level data, the labor force data that you can get is you need to keep in mind that with a population that small, the error ranges are going to be very high. And in fact, starting in 2018, due to budget cuts at the BLS, we will no longer produce town level data for towns smaller than a certain size, which I believe is 1,000, but don't hold me to that. They're still working on the details of that, but we will quit producing that data, A, because of budget cuts, B, because the error ranges on it are pretty wide. So when we look at Laos data and what it tells us, we can make charts like this that looks at the size of the labor force over time. You can look at things like the labor force participation rate, what percentage of the population who is of working age is actually participating in the labor force, which is a oft-discussed topic around here these days. But this is just a quick look at the type of information that you can produce with Laos data. You can also look at, I don't know why Burlington, South Burlington is highlighted there, but you can also look at by labor market area, what the unemployment rate is, number of employed, number of unemployed, size of the labor force, which is just employed plus unemployed, and then the unemployment rates over time. Laos is time series data, so you can create time series out of it. It goes back to the full Laos program goes back to 1972, I believe, and the unemployment rates go back to 1946. And then beyond, anything before 1946, there's a lot of imputed data. The fourth program that we produced is occupational employment statistics, and this, the OES program, looks at, instead of looking at industry-based data, it collects data from firms, but instead of looking at it sorted by industry, it looks at it sorted by occupations, by what people actually do at their jobs all day. If you think of a large company like Global Foundries, they are some sort of microchip manufacturer or something. That's their industry. But within Global Foundries, you have people who are accountants for occupations, you have people who are janitorial staff for occupations, you have engineers, and OES looks at those various occupations and also the rates of pay. It does this by surveying approximately 5,000 firms over a 3-year period, and then publishes that panel of data in 6-month rolling panels. So each panel is 800 or so, and over the course of 3 years, you get about 5,000. And those 5,000, the most recent 5,000, become the published OES data. It provides estimates of employment by occupation. It also produces detailed wage ranges, which we'll look at in a minute. The real strength of the OES program is very precise and relatively accurate wage data that can be used to inform a wide range of public policy questions. OES data is often used when trying to decide if, for instance, the state should fund a training program for X, Y, or Z, for some sort of skill or occupation. We can look and see, are there a lot of those jobs in the state? Are the wages high enough to make this worthwhile? The other time that people use OES data a lot on the private sector side is trying to set pay. If you're hiring somebody into a new position, you're trying to figure out what is a sort of market-based rate that we should pay this person. OES can be very helpful at that, and we'll look at that in just a second. Some of the limitations to OES data, there's only 3 geographies. You can't find out what the wages are for your town. You can get Burlington. You can get balance of state north, which is kind of like everything north of 89 minus Burlington. Or you can get balance of state south, which is everything, kind of like everything south of 89. So you can't get much in terms of geographies. OES can't be used as time series. It really, more so even than QCW, OES should not ever be used as time series. It just doesn't work, although you'll see people use it as time series all the time. And then there are also some reclassification problems because OES data is submitted by the HR person in an office, and they may or may not, as those people change, they might reclassify what people are doing. And that problem, it's usually not a problem, but occasionally we get some weird bumps in OES data related to reclassification. And this is what OES data looks like. You can see that one thing you can see is that it's good to be a chief executive. There are 280 of them in the state. The average pay is $92 an hour. The median pay is $90.59 an hour. And you can get the 10th, 25th, 75th, and 90th percentiles. I happen to take a snapshot here of all of these high-paying management occupations, which, but if you go down, you can get, there are 400 some odd occupations listed here. You can get deli clerks and restaurant staff and janitorial staff and all sorts of the various occupations. So that's how we use OES data. You can also get these detailed occupational reports that look at all the various components of a job. What do the people do? What are the interests of most people in these positions? The education and training required, where you can go to school to gain these sorts of training or these sorts of skills. So there's a wealth of information in these detailed occupation reports. Finally, the last data product that we play any role in is occupational projections. And these are probably our most popular data product because they attempt to look into the future and say which jobs are going to grow the most in the coming years, where are the most openings going to be in the coming years. And as you can see here, I grabbed a bunch of life, physical, and social science occupations. There's not that many of them in terms of total employment in Vermont. So the numbers here are all very small, but you can see that food scientists, conservation scientists are the fastest growing on here at 1.6% growth per year in terms of employment. And between 2014 and 2024, you can see that it actually only increases by 6 positions. And each year, there will be 3 of those open through net replacements, through people moving up in the system and becoming, supervisors or changing careers or something. And then there'll be approximately 1 added each year due to growth in the sector. This detailed information for every occupation also includes education needed for entry. So there's 2-year projections, there's 10-year projections, and then there are 3 sub-state geographies. Once again, there's Burlington, Balance of State North, and Balance of State South. These are secular estimates, which means we don't attempt to predict the business cycle. They say that assuming that economic growth continues as it has, and there's no great expansion, there's no great recession, then this is where we expect it to be in 10 years. And then finally, a couple programs that you should know about. One is our economic and demographic profile. This takes a lot of the data we just discussed and puts it in one very concise place. Sarah, I just saw your message about 5 minutes. How long ago did you send that?
Just a minute ago. I want to try and wrap up and provide some time for questions before
very good.
Before people have to hit the road.
Okay, so I will move through these last couple quickly. One thing I should tell you is that I will send to everybody a document in the next couple days that shows you where to find all of this data on our website. But one thing that's really helpful is this economic and demographic profile, which takes all of the data we've discussed and a whole bunch of other data from census and education and Department of Taxes and Agriculture and puts it all together in a concise document. Well, it's not that concise, it's 150 pages, but it looks at all the data in one concise place, and I will send you a link to that. 2 other things that I feel probably need to be mentioned. Based on this longitudinal employer household dynamics, what this program does is pull together our data, UI data, with census data. Census knows your Social Security number. We know your Social Security number. When you combine the 2, and this isn't our shop, this is done in DC, but when you combine those 2, we know where people live from census, we know where people work from our programs, and you can, from that, glean all sorts of information about the labor market, people being hired, people being fired, the turnover in the workforce. That's all quarterly workforce indicators. And that can give you employment by industry, by age, by race, by ethnicity, by gender. And finally, the other thing this allows us to do, which for the data, the sort of GIS data nerds is the most interesting, is this program called On the Map. On the Map does a wide range of things. The 2 things that are probably the most common, are this inflow and outflow of jobs. So I created this in about 3 seconds on the map. It tells us that about 7,700 people enter Brattleboro to go to work every day, about 3,000 people leave Brattleboro to go to work every day, and about 2,800 people stay in Brattleboro, live and work in Brattleboro. There's all sorts of data like that to look at commuting patterns. You can also look at where people go who live in Brattleboro, how far they travel to work, where they are going. This is the kind of data that transportation planners use all the time. Anyway, as I said, I will send links to all of this data so you can have access to it and point you in the direction of where to find all of this. And with that, I will answer any questions people might have. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions based on Kevin's presentation, please enter it into the chat function of this platform. And if there aren't any questions, I can close up shop here. But while we have Kevin on the line, if there's any burning questions, please feel free to ask.
Well, as Sarah said, I will make sure to send out information on where to find all this data. I know it was a lot of information in 20 minutes.
I have a question while people are maybe thinking. What exactly do you mean by time series? You were mentioning some of these are good for time series, some of them are not.
Yeah. So time series data is data where you can compare, for example, 2016 to 2012 and say that the difference between the two is real-world changes in the real-world changes that happened. For example, if you use CES data and you compare January of 2016 to January of 2015, and there are 1,500 more jobs, you can say that there was job growth of 1,500 jobs.
Okay.
Other data sets like QCW, when you look at it at the industry level, you can't really do that because industries change, or I'm sorry, firms change industries on a regular basis. So if you're trying to look at industry counts, it doesn't quite work with QCW. And then with OES, there's all sorts of, I could go on all day about why that doesn't work as a time series. Mm-hmm. But you should never, people do it all the time, but you shouldn't make a list of OES wages from 2016, 2013, 2010, and 2007 and try to use that to estimate wage growth.
Okay, cool. So it looks like there was a comment from Lee who works at CCV. Do you have any suggestions on how this could be used? CCV is a higher education. I'm sure you might know that.
Yeah, I teach part-time at CCV.
Are there any suggestions on how CCV could use this information?
Well, we actually have worked with CCV in the past on a tax grant, trade adjustment and assistance, something or other. Anyway, I think the primary way that the college system, not as much UVM because they're a large research institution, but most of the colleges use the data just to help inform. If you look at occupational projections, for example, help inform what types of skills we need to be teaching, what type of classes will actually help people move into the labor market to fill this skills gap, if you want to call it that. Mm-hmm. It is frequently used by higher education for that. The other place that CCV might want to use it is if you go into ONET, which is an OES product, which I'll send the link to, you can look at what are the most important skills for upcoming jobs. What skills do we expect to be the most important? And even in my macroeconomics class that I teach, we spend a little time each night managing data, because one of the most sought after skills these days is the ability to manage data, and I manage data for a living. So it gives us an opportunity to teach a really fairly straightforward skill to people that is useful in the outside world, and we know it's useful because OES tells us so.
Great.
Is that good, Leah?
Are there any other questions for Kevin while we have him here? And again, as you can see on his presentation, it has his contact information, so please don't hesitate. I agree with Lee. It was a lot of information, and it seems like a lot of useful information, so it would probably be easiest to just play around with those products that Kevin had mentioned. And again, I will share your email addresses with Kevin, and he's going to send you links to everything that he has talked about today. So I'm going to take back the presentation screen, Kevin. I think that's how we do it. And let me just bring up this. Okay, so our next webinar is going to be July 25th, again, Tuesday, the fourth Tuesday, from 12 to 12:30. John Michael Muse of USDA Rural Development will be our presenter, and he's going to be talking about the housing programs that USDA Rural Development has. They're fairly underutilized programs. A lot of people don't realize that USDA Rural Development does housing programs, so that should be very informative. Again, this session is being recorded and it'll be archived at that website at thebrattleborodevelopment.com/knowledge bites. And also, we have many of these sessions to fill. We're already pretty much full through the end of November, so definitely check out that website, which has the schedule of further upcoming ones. But if you have any suggestions on certain programs or resources, tools that you're interested in learning more about, then please shoot me an email and I can reach out to whoever the expert is in that program or resource, and we can see if we can try and get them to do one of these webinars. Again, that's my contact information, phone, email. Please do not hesitate to reach out. And again, this will be on the website, and Kevin will be sending you some additional information. So if there are no more questions, then I think we'll go ahead and finish the rest of our day.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Yep, thanks, Kevin. I really appreciate it. And everyone have a great rest of your day, okay?
Sarah, can you stick around for just a second?
Sure can.
Yeah. Looks like